Hello, you guys, and welcome to the Inner Beauty Code. I am so excited about our guest today. Her name is Laura Grant. She is a masculine and feminine energy coach, and I've known her for a few years now. We have done some sessions together in the past, and now we just are soul sisters and friends and just connect on all things spirituality, I guess. So, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be a masculine and feminine energy coach?
Yes. So I help people with balancing the masculine and feminine energy within themselves, and then also in their relationships, which then carries into just their environments in general. So work situations, life purpose, all of that. And so my philosophy is really that, the masculine is more of the ego and the feminine energy is the soul. And so we're all working to balance out and bring our soul and our ego into an internal union. And the way that we get information about what we need to do is basically through the relationships that we have with other people. And also, how we're interacting with our environment. So it's a constant process of looking at the external and then receiving that feedback and then going back and doing that self-reflection. And that's pretty much what I do. And like I said, it goes from relationships to purpose work to really just that inner self-development and spiritual evolution within the person. And we kind of bounce around in all those things when I'm working with clients.
I love that so much. And just in case someone is not really sure what that looks like, so how can someone be imbalanced in their masculine and feminine energy? Like, how does that look for someone? So, say, for example, women in society, right? We know are, in order to be successful, you have to grind. And this goes for men too, but you have to grind, you have to hustle, you have to be like 100% focused and no fun, no relaxing. And is that kind of what you mean when you are talking about that? In order to make money, you need to be a certain way, or maybe as a man, you can't feel your feelings, or as a woman, you're in your feelings too much. Can you give a little bit of clarity on maybe like what that might look like to have distorted or imbalanced masculine feminine energy within yourself?
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's definitely, I look at it soul, feminine, ego, masculine, but it's also the external world is more the masculine energy, the inner world is the feminine energy. And so, a lot of us can end up spending so much time in the external and worried about kind of like appearances, how other people are receiving us, and not looking at that inner world. And that's when we're in this imbalance or we're too much in our masculine energy. So, it happens to men and women that they'll be in this distorted energy where they're so focused on like the hustle and the grind and the exterior that they don't take time to go in and explore that inner feminine space, which is that inner world. And then on the flip side, there's people that are too much in their feminine. And so they can be in that emotional space and they can be daydreaming, but not really taking any sort of action, or they're constantly living in the past and overthinking. And a little bit of that overthinking is tends to be masculine energy because masculine energy is the mind, but being trapped in this like emotional loop, that's very much wounded feminine energy, and that can also put you in this kind of distortion between the two energies, right? And this imbalance, and it makes it really hard to have healthy relationships and to move forward in life when you're either in the inner space too much or you're in the outer space too much.
That's such a clear explanation than what I was thinking or trying to give. But so when someone's working with you, what can they expect to be able to gain from working with you, and just from the standpoint that maybe they don't realize that they're out of balance, or maybe they might be having like certain issues that keep showing up in their life that they want to change, but maybe it's a imbalance of their masculine and feminine energy. And I know, I've heard a lot of women to talk about how, men are so emotionally unavailable or so out of touch with their emotions. And then conversely, how men can be maybe too emotional and not masculine enough, or not being that like strong container holder for a woman that they might need. So maybe work like working with you, like what would that look like? What, not the process necessarily, but like the outcomes be for people and kind of things that you've seen shift for people.
Yeah, I really like to meet people where they're at and work with what's happening in their lives. So when someone comes to me and they're experiencing a conflict, and if they're in this place of projecting onto another person, right, and saying, well, this I'm in this relationship and this man is completely emotionally unavailable and he can't receive me, we then take a look at what's going on in their inner world. And so it really takes people out of this place of victim mentality where they feel like they're a victim to what's happening in the external, and they can come back into that inner world and begin to self-reflect and find, what sort of imbalance is within themselves and how they're treating their own masculine, how their own masculine is treating their own feminine, because we all have both energies, right? And then we look at to see, what's going on in that external relationship that is a reflection of the imbalance that's inside. And so again, it's actually really empowering instead of just saying, let's look at all these external situations and find all the issues here. And it's even more empowering than even saying, just like, let's set boundaries and move away from someone that's not treating you right or can't see you. It's about saying, I called this person in for a reason, and I'm experiencing this conflict with them for a reason. And how can I shift myself so that I either feel that I don't need to get pulled back into this anymore, that I can move forward, or can I actually start resolving what's going on within me, and then the people around me start resolving their stuff and we can go on and heal together. So again, it's all about self responsibility.
I love that even more. And what I know in a session that you and I had at one point, we spoke about like the critical mother and how like our inner voice sometimes, we're our own worst critic. I know I remember us talking about that and talking about how we like learn these things over time, not only from our immediate environment, but society in general, how it can be almost projected onto us, like expectations. Can you go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges of our time that I'm seeing in just so many people is that really critical internal feminine voice. I feel that like distorted or toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it, has been really identified, and people have really expressed their dissatisfaction with that type of energy. But what is kind of a little bit hidden is this distorted, toxic feminine energy. And it's not, again, about just like pointing it out and like, oh, I see it in this woman, right? It's more of also looking within ourselves and seeing how what I like to call that distorted mother archetype shows up within ourselves, and how we are self deprecating, shutting ourselves down before we even start, before we even get into that masculine place of action, because of all this like emotional manipulation that's happening within ourselves. And a lot of times it's the inner voices that we've internalized from feminine figures in our life. And it doesn't have to actually be a woman, but it's like a lot of times I see it's like the school teacher type archetype, where you're going to get in trouble if you do this, or you don't want to make a mistake. And some people internalize it from their mother, right? This like very critical inner voice. And so the more that we can take a look at how we're speaking to ourselves, the more we can begin to dismantle that really distorted feminine energy. And it's also very emotionally manipulative. And then we do see it play out in relationships as well too. So we can, if we have that inner voice, that kind of distorted inner feminine voice, we can then embody that and then actually be that for somebody else.
That is just amazing. All of what you just said is amazing because one thing I'm really trying to work on this year myself is being even more better about how I speak to myself. I think, again, we're our own worst critic and we are always so hard on ourselves and sometimes you don't even realize it. And when you say, you talk yourself out of doing things before you do them, I do that to myself too. So the positive self talk, or I mean, even if that's what you want to call it, being more conscious of the way that I criticize and talk to myself is something that I definitely want to get better at. So I just love that you touched on that part of it. And how would the masculine energy within yourself, like how does that show up, maybe if it's distorted, or maybe you don't have enough, or maybe you have too much? And before you even answer that, let's finish up with the feminine. So what would having more healthy feminine energy within ourselves look like?
Yeah, I actually with like both of those questions about what does that distorted masculine look like and the healthy feminine, I can kind of bring those two together because when the feminine is healthy and the masculine is healthy, because they kind of both need to be healthy at the same time for us to express them in a healthy way, because if one is in a distortion, then the other is really going to be in a distortion also. So if our masculine energy is allowing our emotions to flow freely, and so we're not like gaslighting ourselves, and so if we have like these internal feelings or feeling uncomfortable or that gut instinct feeling, the masculine is in a distortion, it will just shut that down. So don't pay attention to that. We need to prove ourselves, or what are other people going to think if we stop? So that would be distorted masculine energy that really silences the feminine. But if the masculine is healthy and is communicating with the feminine, then the feminine is in this place where she feels like she's heard and she's respected. So she doesn't have to go into this distorted place of like blocking our masculine energy from taking action. She's more like dancing with him and working with him. And so we start having like positive self talk, like you said. We start listening to our intuition and paying attention to, this is where it gets spiritual, like signs, paying attention to dreams and things like that, and using that to support the decisions and the choices and the actions that we take in the physical world. And so that for me is really that union of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, when we have that ego physical world, material world, being supported by this kind of loving feminine energy that's like the intuitive, the spiritual realm, and they come together. And so, before we get to that point, there's a lot of gaslighting back and forth of both, where, we'll have this like gut instinct, like I said, and our masculine energy will silence the feminine and say, no, you need to just keep tolerating it. And so that's how we like start to bury our shadow. Or the feminine will get into a place where, again, it's the distortion. And instead of saying, this doesn't feel right, she goes, everybody else is the problem. It's not you. Right. And so then you get into this place where you start projecting onto others and you start not taking ownership for your own mistakes, for your own wounds. And that gets you stuck too. And so it's like this enabling feminine energy that just like lets us just make excuses for everything, or this feminine energy that shuts us down and makes us not even want to step into our power. So it's like distorted and wounded feminine energy. And when they come into this really healthy place, it's more of this like free flowing forward movement and support of the ego instead of blocking the ego or letting the ego off the hook.
So many words of wisdom in that. And it's interesting because I talked a lot about this these past few months in my psychology class, my social psychology class, just about how people, I think it's temperature in many cultures right now for people to be projecting onto everyone externally their stuff, their emotions, and their need to be validated by everyone else instead of being responsible for your own emotional state and like actually doing the healing work and doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. It gets projected out onto others, expecting other people to do that work for you or to make you feel worthy, to make you feel accepted. And so it's just an interesting point that you mentioned before too about how society, where we all know that there's like a toxic masculine energy that people are quick to call out, but nobody really sees the other side of it too, and how that could also be partly the toxic feminine energy or the wounded feminine energy, within us that is looking for acceptance, that we're, instead of doing that work ourselves, we're kind of being the victim of it and projecting it on to society to fix for us, or whoever's in your external world.
Right. Yeah. It totally starts off as this like really wounded feminine space where just feeling like you're a victim to everything. And then that can turn into this distorted feminine energy. And I think that is something that we're seeing, playing out like on the world stage. We're seeing it so many places now where people have gotten so self-righteous in feeling that they've been wronged that they then become the person that's inflicting their power on other people, right? It's like, you hurt me so bad, so now I'm going to tell you that you can't even speak. And, because there's a possibility that if you say something, you're going to hurt me. It's like we've taken this extreme of honoring emotion and almost weaponized it so that it's become this way to shut down other people. That's very much that distorted feminine energy. It's when we are blocking other people's free will because we're saying, well, you hurt me, or you have the ability to hurt me with your words, so you can't say anything. And again, that is actually distorted feminine energy because it's controlling.
Yeah. So, and that touches on how it plays out in society. But another interesting thing, and I know that you and I have spoken about this before, another interesting place that is just a place where this can be played out is on social media, and just seeing that, I've told you before, I did a lot of research this semester on the effect that social media has on comparison, on objectification of women and men as well, and self objectification, and how, just what you're seeing on Instagram is so fake, all the editing, all the filters, and TikTok too, whatever social media platform you're using, just the very curated content that's being posted, not only by individuals but even by brands, and what you see in ads, and how there has been such a trend for putting out fake stuff, and just how damaging that can actually be on a societal level and cultural level, because it's not really attainable. It sets almost a standard of beauty that can never be reached, or perceived attractiveness. It can change how people find others attractive. And then, yeah, how you compare and objectify yourself and internalize that, and never be good enough, and further use that critical feminine energy to criticize yourself. And it causes, like, in the studies, it showed eating disorders and depression, and just further need to edit yourself to be something that's not really reality. So, yeah, how do you feel about that on social media, as far as how it plays out with like distortion?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up because I was talking about, how that wounded feminine can feel such a victim that she goes into this distorted state and she starts blocking other people's free will and feeling very like self-righteous, right? And empowered to inflict her control on other people because she feels hurt. And really it's this wounded feminine that is fueling all this. And it's the same thing, I think, with the whole self objectification, right? Because if the feminine is wounded and she feels like she's not seen, she feels that she has to compete for love, compete for attention, then what she does is she can go into this distorted expression where she starts altering not the other person, so not projecting, but altering herself and her physical appearance and performing so that she can earn love. And again, this is like another way of controlling so that you don't have to experience the wounding. Because, it's like, okay, I'm not lovable, but let me get multiple surgeries and do all these things and edit my photos, and then someone will love me. So it's a way of controlling the situation again. And so, again, this is both coming from this wounded feminine aspect that becomes so difficult to manage that it turns into this distortion where then you use like manipulation tactics, whether it's manipulating your body or manipulating other people to get the love that you feel that you deserve.
So true. And it's interesting that you brought up even like plastic surgery, because there were so many studies. I was actually shocked that were done on people who bring photos, like doctors did these studies with people bringing in edited photos of themselves from the apps that you can use on your phone, like Facetune, where they would show the doctor an edited photo of themselves and say, I want to look like this AI version of myself or this photoshopped version of myself. Can you do this? And I just found that it could be helpful in ways, but also it's actually kind of crazy that that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for me, a lot of people will kind of push back sometimes when I talk about these topics and say, the feminine should be able to express herself however she wants. And if she wants to express herself through beauty, then so be it. And it's wrong to be critical of that, right? And I do believe that we have a right to self expression, and feminine energy is all about self expression. And, when it's working with the masculine energy, it fuels the way that we present ourselves, like in our ego identity, right? And but when the feminine energy is more in the superficial state instead of this like soul aligned state, the expression becomes superficial as well. And that's the issue that we have, right? Where we've fallen so far from like really being connected to our authentic selves and our souls, that we see self-expression as really physical material manipulation of the physical appearance, right? Instead of, just like sensual expression of self or like art or things like that, right? We're so far removed from authenticity and truth now that it's become synonymous with like, okay, let me whip up an AI version of myself and go into a doctor and have them create this false version, and that's self-expression. Again, it's like a very superficial form of it. So, and it's not to shame women to say that, oh, we shouldn't feel beautiful. Absolutely not. It's part of healthy feminine energy is feeling comfortable in your skin and feeling beautiful. And, aesthetics is very much feminine, right? So it's not to say that that's not an important part of having healthy feminine energy. But again, when it gets to this place where it is a way to manipulate others to try to get love, that's a distortion.
So crazy. Yeah. And again, it's like, how do you say these things with, you don't want to offend people either, or I can understand coming from a world, as a makeup artist, coming from a totally superficial external beauty world, and makeup, can do great things for people. It can boost your confidence for a short time and make you feel good. And I am the first one to want to post nice pictures of myself, but there is a fine line between false representation, or again, feeling the need to alter your appearance or post very curated things that are not authentic. And it's like, what's the motivation behind why you're posting? Because Instagram and social media has made it very common nature for people to post half naked photos online. And again, not criticizing, I've posted pictures of myself in my bikini, but only because in the past I have not felt good about myself because my lifestyle wasn't healthy. And now I've come to a place where am accepting of my physical body, and I've worked hard to be in a place where this is who I am, this is what I look like. So I think I try to be authentic too when I'm posting. So it's an interesting balance, right? To find that, and maybe this will get people thinking about the motivation behind why they're posting what they're posting, or how they're presenting themselves to the world, right? If it's not coming from a place of authenticity, it gets exhausting to have to keep up with that too.
Right, right. It's like if we look back, 20 years ago, plastic surgery was for people that were like in an accident or something, and something happened to their face and they needed to reconstruct it. Or then it led into just like someone had like a feature that like for a long time they were teased about, and they just wanted to make an adjustment to it. And then it turned into this whole thing of like, I'm gonna just completely reconstruct my face so that I can look like this certain celebrity or look like this girl on Instagram, because then I will receive all the love and attention that they're receiving. And so there's this competitiveness there, right? Whereas before it was more of like, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this, right? And it's just kind of an extension of like, if you're uncomfortable with like the way your body looks, and you can go to the gym and you can shift your body by, lifting and whatever you're doing, right? To just kind of alter that physical appearance that you're self conscious about. It's taken it to the extreme now where it's not just about, I feel uncomfortable with this and I want to shift this. It's like, I feel that if I completely change myself and perform, then that's how I'm going to receive the love that I've never received before. Or I'm going to receive the attention, or I need to keep up with everybody else because everyone else has had these surgeries. And so it goes from like wanting to look our best to getting to this place of where it's just completely fake. And there's like you said, there's just like no baseline of like where it's going to end. And it's actually a little scary if we don't check it. And so I'm all for empowering beauty in women. I think it's very important, men and women, right? Men should feel good about themselves too in their appearance. But when it's the leading energy and we take it to this extreme, it just keeps the ball keeps rolling, and it's like, when will it end? Right? Like, what extreme are we going to go to?
Yeah, and it's like classic social comparison theory where we gauge our beliefs and what's true about ourselves based upon like kind of reflecting off of other people and just assessing our own abilities and things like that based upon what's going on around us. And it's, yeah, and I think if you are influential, it kind of gets to a scary point because kids these days, they're growing up on social media. I think, our generation is one of the last to not grow up with that social media. And it's like, if you're getting your worth from something that's constantly changing, if you think about the standards of beauty as well, we might be getting into a whole other conversation. But if you think about the standards of beauty, it's an external marker that's always changing. I mean, think about it when we were growing up in the 90s, to be super skinny was like the ideal beauty, right? And, to look like Kate Moss and to be this big. But then as time went on, and you and I both are have more curvy bodies. And I don't know about you, but I've always had hips and a butt and never been like a super lanky, skinny girl. So for me, that was also like a interesting thing. And then J Lo came around, and curvy bodies were in, and that was the ideal version. So if you're placing your self worth on standards or gauging it on things that are external, that are always changing, again, where does it end? And then are you going to go to the extremes to look a certain way for a short period of time, and then what? And then what are you going to do? So I think it's just something to take into consideration, where it can be almost, if you're starting to feel like you're not worthy or not good enough or not worthy of love, it's not really about what you look like. It's kind of trying to figure out what's going on within you to see where the source of that inadequacy is coming from. And again, if something's always
Absolutely.
changing, who cares? You just have to find that within yourself.
Absolutely. It eventually comes to this place, right? Like again, growing up in the 90s, like where it was this almost unattainable thinness, right? I internalized a lot of damage from that as a young girl. And because I've always been like more fuller bodied, like more curvy woman. And so for me, what like my body was like deemed not attractive in those times, and so I internalized that, and that was part of my wounded feminine. And then we turn around now and it's like, oh no, that's actually what's attractive. And so did it even matter what other people were asking? It didn't, right? It has to come from that self love. And so no matter what the trends are, no matter what's happening in the like beauty standards in the external world, we have to come to this place of finding our value and our worth, from a place that comes way deeper than what we look like, and even what we do in the physical world, right? Even we can get into this place where the competitive energy can be about like, getting a degree or getting a job or getting a title, or again, money, right? Which is more kind of something that masculines and men deal with more. But it's there for women as well, because you know you hear like a lot of stuff about, oh, like that woman's a freeloader or something like that, right? So all of us kind of deal with that, right? But if we starting to come back within, and we come back in and we find our worth from something that is not ever changing, and understanding that we are unconditionally loved and that we have value and we have worth beyond what the external world thinks of us, then we can really start getting to this place of self acceptance and honoring our uniqueness and honoring our own path, and also being gentle with ourselves, because it takes a while to get to where you really want to be in life. It's like a constant journey of changing and shifting and growing. So to say that like you finally have attained like this state of perfection, that's not truth. That's not what this life is about. It's about constantly learning and growing and shifting and changing as we go. It's about the journey. And so it's really, I think it comes down to this ideal of like perfection that many of us are chasing, and it doesn't even exist.
So true. And then even just how we treat other people, not only ourselves, if you're not feeling great about yourself, it could go one of two ways. You can either put other people up on a pedestal and idolize them, or you can compete with them. And I think that is another way that distorted and wounded feminine energy, especially, and even masculine too, you start to compete with other women and put other women down and tear someone else down to lift yourself up. And I don't know that that's going to change in our lifetime in society, but it's almost, whoever's out there listening right now, to think about that. Think about if that's like your immediate response or reaction to seeing someone that you might think is more attractive or doing better than you are in life. Are you quick to be jealous and try to bring that other person down? Or yeah, how why is that happening? Is it happening because you're not happy with yourself and you admire something else about them? Because that's often what happens too. And then in the masculine, in men, criticizing someone that maybe is not as successful or doesn't have as much money as you have, or not as fit as you are, maybe not as good looking or as tough, and then maybe that's more in touch with their emotions. Putting someone down for being in touch with their emotions can play out, and it's just, yeah, all very toxic and unhealthy, not only for other people but for you, for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, one thing I did a video recently on YouTube, and I do these collective updates on masculine and feminine energy. And one thing that came through that we're really trying to dismantle at this time is this, I refer to it as this concubine energy. And so, with the way it played out in relationships and connections was that if we look back in history, like the kings had tons of wives. And so, women were pitted against each other to compete for the attention of this masculine who essentially was like a distorted masculine. And a lot of times it was for survival too. And that's what's even more messed up, right? Is the feminine had to look beautiful in order to be chosen by the king. And it wasn't even just like by the king, right? Just to survive as a woman, you had to be taken in by a man. And because we didn't have rights, we didn't have the ability to work. All we had as our currency was our appearance. And then we had to compete with other women to get chosen by the most wealthy man. And that is something that we're continuously dismantling right now. And so you can see how it plays out in the collective of this like competition between women. And we don't understand how deeply seated these roots are, and how it comes from like our ancestors, and how women, again, like the only thing that they had that they could use to like succeed in life was that, right, is their physical appearance. And, again, as we dismantle that, part of that was like giving power to women so that women could work, women could vote, women could have rights. And we can see that even with all of that, that root cause, like that root wound is still there. And so we still, that's where that inner work take place, right? Because you can be an extremely successful woman, be extremely powerful, and not need a man, but still have that kind of that wound that makes you compete with other women.
Yeah, and I love that you just brought up the historical part. I forgot about that part of your information, your wealth of knowledge here at the archetypes throughout history. I mean, are there any other ones that you want to point out or go over now to explain, just because I find that that's super interesting as well?
Yeah, I think, like I said, there is this big healing right now of that, also that distorted feminine energy. So there's also kind of I call it like the crone in the woods type energy. I like to use fairy tale analogies, and so there's this whole kind of like sector of the feminine that was like, I'm not going to compete and use my body as currency. And so she like left, right? And she like exited and went into the woods and started practicing witchcraft and was like down with the patriarchy and like burn it all, right? And so we have those women that are like really strong, fierce women, and I've heard it referred to as before as like the daughters of the witches. And so there's also some healing that has to happen there too, because there's a lot of mistrust of the masculine systems and structures in that archetype as well. So we have like this one feminine archetype that is like the perform I'll perform with my body and my beauty to get chosen, and another that is like, I don't even trust the masculine and I want nothing to do with him. And so it's almost like they both need a little bit of each other to balance each other out, right? It's like the dead performing princess energy, right? Kind of needs a little bit of that like fiery witchy crone energy that's like down with the system. And that kind of down with the system feminine energy kind of needs a little bit of that, well, this place isn't that bad, right? And I can be safe here. And so again, it's like a balancing of not only our masculine and feminine, but the distorted and the wounded aspects of both the masculine and the feminine as well.
So interesting. And that reminds me almost of like Queen of Sword energy and versus like Queen of Cups energy. The like, I'm gonna come in and cut off your head and stand up for myself and just like again burn it all to the ground. That like Kali, like very like warrior energy, Athena, versus having, there's a time and place for that energy, and we all need that energy within us, but then we also do need that like Queen of Cups. I love how you said that in the feminine, to be sweet and be kind. And I'm saying this because I love talking about relationships, because relationships play such an important role, and I think we touched on it earlier in the conversation. And I believe this, that relationships are like reflecting back to you kind of where you're at and giving you an opportunity to heal and to change things within yourself. And that's something that I'm super conscious of at the moment. And I'm single, and I want a relationship sooner probably rather than later, and figuring out how to be in relationship with someone and express needs and be okay with that without getting into that I'm going to cut off your head and this is over and screw you, you're not doing what I want kind of thing. And or try, not that I really try to control or manipulate people, but that's how that energy can show up if you're too much in crone or the Queen of Swords energy. Can we talk about that a little bit? Like what what kind of stuff do you see popping up in relationships for people that might show up like in relationship with your significant other, how that distortion, wounding, imbalance of masculine feminine energy can kind of show up and cause a little bit of problem for you, or not allow you to communicate effectively and not and be projecting onto your partner.
Yeah, yeah. It's again, I think it circles back to what I was saying earlier about the self-responsibility. And so we can really get quick to this place of like blaming everyone else for our problems. And of course, there are situations where you are like actively being abused by another person. And you do have to set boundaries. But I think like the term narcissist has been so heavily overused at this point, and a lot of times it's associated with men too. And so we're seeing that what's happening is that it's almost like letting the feminine off the hook at this point where it's like she can do no wrong, and it's allowing her to like get into this place of like, again, like demanding and controlling, when maybe there needs to be like a second to pause and self reflect and see how your partner is mirroring back to you something within you that still needs to be resolved, instead of just they're the whole problem. And it's again, it's a fine line, and it's touchy because I would never want to enable someone being abused, but I also don't want to enable victim consciousness. And so again, it's a balance of the two. And in relationships, I think the best thing to do is to then go back and look at, and this is why I teach about masculine and feminine energy, look at your own energies separately and how they're relating to each other. And then if the other person chooses to grow and change and shift with you, lovely, beautiful. Then you guys can continue to grow together. But if you start taking the initiative to do the work on yourself and the other person isn't changing, then there just needs to be a separation there. And so no blame, just gratitude for the experience to learn.
And I love that too. I believe that too. You know, it's not, it takes two people and we're both showing up like 50-50. And this is not talking about people that are being abused or being forced into a situation or being manipulated. I'm talking about relationships that don't have that added component. It's when I notice that it is easy, because I think men too, from what I've experienced myself or what I've witnessed or heard from other women, it's like men can be afraid to be in a relationship because of women dumping all of that emotional stuff and responsibility on them to fix problems or to take responsibility for their feelings, which, yeah, your partner can be there to help support you and be there for you, but expecting someone else to carry your burden and fix it for you can be really heavy for a partner. And it goes both ways, not just for men, but I do notice that women, obviously, maybe not obviously, but a lot of the times women are the ones that are more emotional in the relationship, and men don't know how to handle that. And women don't even know how to regulate their own emotional states. And I think all you can do, right, is look at yourself and keep improving yourself, and then hopefully things around you will change. So my point here is just that sometimes maybe it is, if you start working on yourself, it will give someone else the space to meet you there, but also you'll be able to see that someone might that you're with might just not be the right person for you, or it's time to separate and look for someone else.
Right, right. And I think it also comes down to, this is something I also talk about in my work, is that, there are soul connections and there's reasons why certain people come into our lives. And some people come into our lives because it's a lesson. And we have to be okay with that. And you can have all of this existing within yourself simultaneously: the distorted, the wounded, and the divine. Actually, we all do have all three. And so you can have a connection with one person and show up more in your wounded space, and then have a connection with someone else and be in your distorted space, and then have a connection with someone else where you're really in your divine space. And so we really need to start paying attention, and this also is about honoring the feminine, to how we feel around other people, and really beginning to decipher or discern, who's coming in because they're a lesson, who's coming in because they want to grow with me. And the more that we can accept that a relationship isn't just supposed to be this like blissful bubble of happiness, that it is a place where we do conscious work, the more we can continue to work on ourselves and take responsibility instead of projecting and blaming and unleashing and emotionally purging on another person.
I love that. That's such a good reminder, because again, in movies, or whatever, in society, we're sold this dream that everything's supposed to be a fairy tale, when that's not the case at all. So I think a lot of times people too are less willing to work to make relationships work, or they think it has to be all terrible and hard work and tough, when you can still work through stuff with people and grow and come out the other side and not have it be a terrible, heavy, difficult experience. Or you might have to feel emotions that might not feel great, but it doesn't have to be like a lengthy journey to get to the other side or through them. It could be an easier process than you're creating in your head.
Yeah, definitely. And the more we can sit with our wounds, the less we will see, conflict, blaming, all of that. Because this control that we've been speaking of throughout the podcast, it comes from this inner control of not wanting to feel. And so the more we can feel and sit in our discomfort and really look at our own wounding, the less we have to control or manipulate ourselves or others.
So good. So true. Laura, I just loved hearing all of the amazing things you had to share with us today. That was so insightful and so helpful for me personally. So I hope everyone else, it resonated with you guys as well. And if someone wanted to learn more about you, possibly work with you, or see more of the content that you put out on social media, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. My handle on Instagram is at Laura the Woken Mind, Laura the Woken Mind on Facebook, and Laura Woken Mind on Twitter. I also have a YouTube page, and so that channel is Laura the Woken Mind, and I post videos about every couple weeks. And so those are ways that you can get access to the information that I'm sharing with the collective on a regular basis.
I've watched many of your videos and you put out such interesting content, and I love it. I love it. So keep going. I find it super interesting and insightful. And I can't thank you enough, Laura, for being on today. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I think that we really covered some major things that are happening in the collective reality on the world stage and then also within so many of us. So I'm grateful to be here and thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to end now, and everybody go check out Laura's socials. She is awesome, and her YouTube page as well. You guys will not regret it. She has such great info on there. Thank you.